Welcome to Common Sense. The Common Sense program is a series of shows that feature interviews with very interesting people so that we can learn in a clear, concise, and direct way who these folks are, what they do, and what makes sense to them and what doesn't. I'm Rudy Breglia, and today I'll be interviewing the wise, knowledgeable, and experienced realtor, Ken Kodger.
Thank you, Rudy.
Ken, welcome to Common Sense. As a footnote, Ken and his wife, Lois, have over 60 years of experience selling residential homes in our area and have personally been involved in the sale of over 1,300 properties. That's quite a bit.
That's good.
Ken, to start us off, why don't you give us some background? Tell us what brought you to this part of Ohio?
Very interesting. My wife and I were both born in Lakewood Hospital.
Okay.
So I guess our parents brought us to this part of the country.
Okay.
And except for 10 years in Columbus after I graduated from Ohio State.
Okay.
We stayed in Columbus for 10 years, and then we moved back here because I wanted our children to be involved with their grandparents.
Okay. Well, that's great. Tell us about your experience raising 5 wonderful and successful children. What's the secret?
I don't know, except I can say I married the perfect wife.
Oh, that always helps. Always helps.
I did a lot of traveling in my early business career as a professional engineer. And so there was a time, and it's one of the reasons I got into real estate is because I didn't have to travel anymore.
Okay.
I'll only relate one story that I recall that my son Ken, when he was a sophomore or junior in high school here in Avon Lake, he came home one day and he wrapped his arms around his mother and said, "Mom, I am so glad that you are home here when we come home. Every kid that's in trouble at the high school doesn't have that advantage."
Understand.
Okay.
Understand.
So that is part of it, I think. I also think that they all went to St. Joseph's grade school.
Okay.
I think that is a preferred place to go. Nothing against Redwood or the rest of them. But because my children have turned out to be such wonderful human beings, I would recommend that start with anyone.
Right. It's a caring, loving environment at that school.
Yeah.
I know.
It is.
Well, let's get into it. What's the difference between the terms real estate sales agent, brokers, realtors? Well, what's the difference between those terms?
Well, anyone can sell their own home, or you could, without even a license, you could help me sell my home. So anyone can be, your attorney could be your agent.
Okay. All right.
But a realtor, what makes real estate a profession for realtors is our code of ethics.
Okay.
And so we follow a code of ethics, the same as lawyers do, doctors do, attorneys do. And we have continuing education that every realtor is required to do every 3 years. I think it's 30 hours.
As part of a license.
As part of keeping a license current.
Okay.
So anyone can sell their own home, but when's the last time you decided to operate on your own teeth or to operate on yourself or to remove a kidney? You go to a professional to do that. And I think there is the same difference between trying to sell your house yourself. In fact, most of the time that I find someone selling their house themselves, it turns out they're an attorney.
I see.
Okay, so they've already got the license, and the profession.
Okay. All right. What's the best way to identify a good real estate sales agent?
Well, I think the first thing is the hardest thing, and that's to find an honest person. Most realtors are honest.
Okay.
The next thing is you have to find a realtor who's dedicated to the business, such as myself, of course. We've been full-time realtors now for 37 years, 38 years, something like that. Lois about 30 years, so that's where we get to the 60 number. It's the total combined together. I think that we need to talk further about the requirements of being a realtor.
Okay.
Because it is not an easy business, and it's only gotten more complicated as the businesses. When I first started, we got our multiple listing services, but in 1977, I became a part-time realtor, and we actually got our license, our multiple listing service on a piece of paper that came from the downtown headquarters, and they were brought out to each of the brokers' offices. And of course, in 1987, when I started full-time, there was a little more computers involved. Well, since we've gotten more computers, we've gotten more paper. I mean, honest to heavens, in 1987, it took 5 pieces of paper to sell and transfer and market a house, and now it takes about 50.
Okay. Is there any difference between a buyer's agent and a seller's agent?
Well, sure. One works as an agent for the buyer. One works as an agent for the seller. I don't know if you want anything further than that, but to be a buyer's agent, you have to have a contract with that buyer before you show the buyer a house. And that changed August of last year. It's an important distinction to realize what has happened to our industry since August. And that's the biggest change, is the fact that before an agent can show anybody a house they have intention of possibly buying, they have to have a written contract with that buyer. Same thing is true of working for a seller. The agreement for hiring a realtor as your agent as a seller is that you have a multiple listing service listing, and that's a complete contract.
Okay.
With each other. Each realtor today has to have a contract before they can really go and help anybody.
Understand. Now, what credentials are most important for an agent? Being licensed, is that?
Yes, anybody who has a current real estate license is a realtor. They are supposed to, of course, know the code of ethics and follow the code of ethics. That's, in fact, there's just 30 hours we have to take every 3 years in continuing education. 10 of those, I believe, have to be with ethics. You have to know the code of ethics and follow the code of ethics.
Okay. What are the typical provisions in a contract to engage a real estate sales agent?
Buyer or seller?
Why don't we do both?
Okay. Well, as I said, the listing agreement is what happens when you become a representative, an agent for the seller.
Okay.
And I always tell everyone that I'm privileged enough that they give me their listing to try to find and market their home, is that I have to, first of all, do the detail work that is required to get to the listing. What happens in our business really is and a wise lister will do this, someone who's going to sell their house. They get to talk to at least 3 agents.
Okay.
So call 3 agents, and based on the presentation that those agents give to the seller, they make their best decision as to who to go with. As long as they're a licensed agent, they're qualified to use the multiple listing service. We assume they're following the code of ethics, and they're working for a broker who is honest. And so any realtor who has a license. Beyond that, there are other credentials that we can have. Lois and I are both called CRSs, just to abbreviate, Accredited Realtor Specialist.
Okay.
There are probably 20 of these today that talk about commercials. ePro is an interesting one that came along about 20 years ago. 40 years ago when I started this business, there wasn't any electronic anything. So we actually, that's another one, so I'm an electronic pro. That's one of the designations. So the next thing you can do, how many years have you been in the business? How many homes have you sold? And what other credentials do you have? I know you've got a real estate license. What other credentials have you worked with? These are people who have dedicated their life, I would assume, since they've gone to the extra work. Each of these credentials, these additional credentials probably require somewhere between 30 and 50 hours of work.
Okay.
So these are someone who has these additional credentials or someone who's dedicated to the industry. Okay. With a buyer, there's a contract that a buyer has to have, and they say they work exclusively with this agent to find a house. Now, there's a lot of detail to that. There's a time requirement, is the primary one.
You mean like 1 or 2 years, or
one house.
Okay.
Okay. I'm hiring you, Mr. Realtor, to show me that house, period. It can be that short. And that's the duration of the contract. But if I buy that house, I'm going to pay you a certain commission, and that's where the change has been. In now the buyer has to recognize that they're going to be responsible for some of the commission, if not all of the commission, that's going to be due to the person they've just hired to work for them.
Okay.
Okay? That's a big change. We haven't had that in the past.
All right. How long is the typical commitment?
It could be one house
to the house, or is there a time? Can you have a time period as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
2
usually
years or
typically,
1 year?
oh, no one's going to commit to a realtor to find me a house in 2 years, although I just spent 3 years finding a house for a certain party recently.
But
And,
that's unusual.
That's very unusual. And of course, that was a commitment that they made without a contract 3 years ago, because the contract requirement only started in August. As far as a listing of a house, though, for sale, that's typically 3 months, I would assume. We typically say we will represent you and get your house sold within 3 months.
Okay.
That's a listing agreement.
Is there a typical cancellation? Let's say you're dissatisfied, either a seller or a buyer. You're dissatisfied with an agent.
Right.
Is there a way of canceling the policy?
Oh, yeah. You just call the agent and tell him that you want it canceled. Now, he's going to ask why, but it sort of doesn't matter. These are open-ended from that standpoint. I may have a listing agreement for 3 months, but if I haven't done the marketing of the property, if I haven't properly staged the house, if the house hasn't sold or even had an offer or even a showing in a couple of months, the realtor's probably doing something wrong. Okay. And if I can't, as a seller, come to an agreement with that realtor and decide what is wrong, then I'm going to ask him to leave and get another realtor.
Okay, so you would write to the realtor and...
Yeah, the broker has to be involved at that standpoint, because all of the agreements are really not with the agent. It turns out it's with the broker. Fine point.
Okay.
But the broker then is going to find out. And of course, if he has 2 or 3, if this happens to one agent 2 or 3 times, he's probably going to ask the agent to leave the office too.
I see. Okay. So contact with the broker would allow you to cancel
yeah, you'd probably go through your realtor, but all listers know, all sellers know who the broker is, of course.
Okay.
Like Keller Williams or Howard Hanna. Right.
All right. Should a client know up front whether the method and frequency of communication, what it's going to be?
Of course. You've got to be up front. Well, let's go back to the whole process. Let's go through the whole process.
Okay.
I get a call from a seller, and we're thinking about selling our house. Okay, when do you think you want to do this? 2 years from now. Well, okay, let's go over your house and tell you. This recently happened. 3 years ago, I had a call from a good customer. In fact, it was 5 years ago. I'm sorry, it's 2018. I looked that up. Mm-hmm. And they asked me to come over and look at their house and see what they had to do to get it sold in Fairview Park. So Lois and I went over there, and we toured the house. We took all the measurements of the house. We took pictures of the house, not for publication, but just for our own edification, that we would remember what the house is like. Then we came back to them about a week or 10 days later, and we gave them a multiple listing service. Now, when we first got taught it, I don't know how people are taught today, but there was a form, and you filled it out, and you handed it to the seller, and you said, "Here's my market analysis." Well, we haven't done that for years, probably most of our life. What we try to do is we look at Fairview Park, because that's where this house is, and then we try to find, it's a 4-bedroom colonial with a basement, so we put that in the multiple listing service, and then we look and try to find 8 or 10 comparables.
Understand.
Okay, because it's the comparables, and usually they're in the last 3 months, if possible, that will determine what the value of their house is, considering. And what's beautiful about the multiple listing service today is there's up to 30 pictures in there of these 10 houses, and I present all of that to the seller. So I presented that to the seller, and I told them, I think we can sell your house for, I think it was $425. Okay. And when would you like to put the house on the market? Well, we have to find a house first. So this is an older couple that's in a 4-bedroom colonial with a basement, and they want a ranch. But the gentleman actually rides in the metro parks every day. So we have to find a ranch that's big enough for her to have her office in the house, and for him to have an office, and be close enough that he can ride his bike in the metro parks. Well, long story short, we probably showed them 25 homes out of the 300 homes that I sent them over the next 3 years. And we finally, last year, found a home for these people, and they purchased the home, and then we turned around and we put, of course, now we have to do a whole new market analysis all over again, because this is 5 years later, literally, 2018 to 2024. And it turned out the number was almost exactly the same, because not a lot has changed in that period of time in Fairview Park market. But we represented the multiple listing service, CMA analysis of the home to them, put the house on the market, and I think it took 10 days to actually get an offer a little bit higher than what we had offered, because there is a shortage of housing out there today.
Okay.
So that's the process that every good realtor is going to go through. No one wants to go through it in that length of time, of course. But to also bring up another point, one of the first sellers that I ever had in this business, this goes back now 36 years, they were selling their house on Duff. They wanted to move. I don't know why they ever moved, because it was a nice, beautiful ranch, but they wanted to move.
Okay.
They wanted a little bigger house, I think. And so we found them a house on Greenwood Drive, right where I live, actually, just down the street from where I live. And that was, like I said, 36 years ago. I lived in Greenwood for about 30 years. Gave me a call one day. Of course, we'd seen them in the neighborhood and visited them on many occasions. We want to sell our house, and we think we want to go to town center, the condos up here.
Okay, understand.
And so we sold that house for them. And then 2 years ago, so they were at Greenwood for about 30 years, and up at the town center for about 4 years, maybe 5. We want to sell that, and we're now over at Independence Village.
Understand.
So there's a customer that I had for the entire length, practically, of my 37 years in the business, keeping in contact with them. How you do that is up to the agent, the realtor.
Okay, so you follow that couple through the stages of their life.
Yes.
Should a client check a realtor's references and feedback from past clients? Now, I think the viewers will see a listing of your experience, that slide with your experience. And should that take place? Should you go through that exercise?
Oh, sure. That's why you bring in 3 realtors before you list a house.
Understand. Right.
Okay. You want to know what their credentials are beyond being a realtor. About 10 years ago, I told some agent that we were having a bit of an argument over something. It doesn't matter what. She says, "There's no way you've sold 1,000 homes." I said, "Well, sure I have. I've probably sold more than 1,000 homes, Lois and I." Well, it got me thinking I should probably have a record of this. And what the viewer just saw is the record, and that's actually 1,300 homes. Now I'd probably change it to 1,325 or 1,350.
Okay, yeah.
Because it took me that was actually an ad that I put in the Avon Lake Press quite a few years ago.
Okay, understand. What about the importance to a client of the sales by an agent in the last year, the price range of the homes that were bought or sold, and the average days on the market? Are those criteria that you can judge an agent by?
Yes, it's one criteria, but once again, if you're talking to me, I've sold 1,325 homes, and here are the addresses of those homes, and if you'd like to contact the buyer or seller,
go ahead.
Just pick one of those out, and I'll find you the name and the buyer and the seller to do that. Now, but I didn't start that way. When I started 37 years ago, I was brand new to the business.
Yeah.
How did I start? I didn't have anything. It was my personality. And so, one of the ways you get business is you knock on people's doors. And one of the first listings I ever had is I knocked on this person's door in Bay Village, and they liked me, and they liked what I had to say, and they knew I was brand new, but they were willing to help me out.
Okay.
Because, the seller's got a lot to do with the house. The experience comes from my perspective as to what you can help the seller realize from an objective point of view. I mean, they might love that ficus tree in the corner there, but I'm going to tell him ficus trees are out. We need to put something else there or nothing might be better. But he loves the ficus tree. He's not going to think about doing that. So it takes an objective view of the house.
Understand.
And the only way to get that objective view is to be in the marketplace, working all the time, seeing what's sold, why they've sold, pricing, of course, and condition. It's location, location, location now. It's location, price, and condition.
Okay. How important is whether an agent is working full-time or part-time? And I think you've answered that question.
Well, I can give you more specific. In 1977, I decided to become a part-time realtor. After we moved back from Columbus, and I had a nice job here, but I had some spare time, and we needed the money because we're heading into a point where I have 4 kids in college.
I see.
So I said, well, I'll get some extra money to become a realtor. So I became a realtor in 1977. And I soon realized that if this was a profession, it had to be done full-time.
Right.
I mean, when's the last time you went to a doctor and you didn't think he was a full-time doctor?
Yeah.
Went to a dentist or an eye
Part-time
surgeon?
doctor.
But I learned very quickly. Now, I'm a professional engineer. I was a registered professional engineer in the state of Ohio for over 50 years.
Okay.
So I've got an engineering background, plus a sales background. And now I've been in 1,300 homes or more. And so that's experience is what really counts. And it comes across at this point, I hope. But when you're brand new, you still got to find someone who's going to work with you. Just another key to that too. The reason I was so successful, I stopped doing it because you just can't do a part-time real estate profession. So in '87, I decided I would do this part-time because I mentioned before I was doing a lot of driving, selling, and in the jobs I had prior to becoming a realtor in '87. And so one of the reasons to be a local realtor is to be local. Okay, now we've got 5 children, and we just had 11 years later, we had our 5th child come along, so things were a little different in the Kodger household. So I became a full-time realtor. I'm very successful my first year. Back then, everybody talked about $1 million realtor, and you know, if you got $5 million, you were the best realtor in the area.
Yeah.
Well, my first year, I did $3 million.
Okay.
And
Not
the
bad.
reason it was is because I had a beautiful friend, Jim Judge, who was my mentor, and he had been in the business and of doing all sorts of things. He actually sold me my house in '77 because he was the manager for Bucky Koff that year.
Okay.
So he had a lot of experience, and he helped me because he talked me into becoming a full-time realtor. So the key to this is to get a mentor. If you have a mentor that will help you, he took me every place that he went for the first few months until I really learned what the business was all about.
Well, it sounds great. What about a team versus a single agent?
You are always only ever dealing with a single agent.
Okay.
My broker is Keller Williams, citywide. That's an office. Happens to have 320 people in that office. Probably the biggest office in our whole multiple listing service. But Keller Williams is the largest broker in the United States, followed by RE/MAX, I believe. And they only are there if you have a problem. Otherwise, you're the seller, I'm the agent. I'm the only one you're going to really deal with. Now, for a time, Lois and I had our own office. We had our own secretary. And that can be very important if you have the number of listings to support that. And at the time, we did. That brings up another thought. Jeez. There are 5 things that a realtor must do for you. Okay. He must help you set the price. He must help you stage the home. He must market the home properly. He must negotiate for you, and then he has to get the house through closing. Now, you know, once you've got a contract and everybody's in agreement, you would think that. I once asked the secretary that I just mentioned in the office that I had years ago, keep track of the number of calls that you personally get that involve the closing of this home. She reported back about a month later, for 35. 35 contacts that she had to make from the time we had an acceptable contract until the buyers got their keys. Now, if you don't know that, and you're not set up to do that as an individual agent, okay, and even if you're part of a team, you're still an individual agent. The team is only there because maybe they have an experienced realtor at the head of the team, okay, and he can help guide you, but you still have to do that paperwork yourself, okay. The broker is only there to make sure the paperwork is properly done because he's responsible to the state of Ohio for the agents that are under him.
Okay.
I can elaborate on all 5 of those if you want.
Well, it seems to me that maybe a single agent needs a little bit of support
Well, once again,
to be successful.
At the time we had an office, I was running the ads. Well, I bring this back to the other point. They were going to ask me the question about the articles that I wrote in the Avon Lake Press. From 2003 until 2016, I wrote a weekly article in the Avon Lake Press that discussed all the aspects that I'm talking about now as being a realtor, plus keeping the folks I hoped up to economic times, what was happening. Dodd-Frank, what is that going to do to us? And I was getting a lot of requests to sell houses at that time. That started to dry up, interestingly enough, after the Avon Lake Press quit in 2016. So, if you've got 5 or 6 listings, you better have some support. Yes, because you need those 35 phone calls. Might have been exceptional, but as far as I know, they're not. And we can go through all of those 35 if you want, what could possibly cause that. And there weren't any problems. It was just normal procedures.
Okay.
So, yes, and that's why Lois and I have made a great team because we work together very closely. And I don't have my phone with me, but she's got the phone with her now. So we can answer the phone anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. One of us is going to be there to answer the phone.
Understand. Now, I think we kind of went over this when you talked about the process. In your mind, what are the most important steps in the typical sales process?
Oh, they're all important. As I mentioned, 5 of them.
Okay.
I mean,
is there any that stand out?
No, they're all important.
Okay.
Everything is, it's a process. And once again, I get that word basically from my engineering background. You can't go to 3 if you haven't done 1 and 2. You can't market a house properly unless you've priced it properly and have it ready for sale staging.
Okay.
And then you've got to negotiate. Now, the way the market is running today, you put a house on the market, in 1 or 2 days you might end up with 5 or 6 offers. And one of those you want to turn into a contract, so that's when you've got to meet with the seller, obviously, and go through each one of those in detail. And then the negotiation starts. I'd like to work with this one for this reason. Okay, the timing's better. It's an all-cash sale. They're not asking for an inspection. Okay, they're not asking for a home warranty. I like this one better than the other ones. Well, what the process, however, is that you don't necessarily accept that one contract because it looks a little better because maybe it's $5,000 less than this other one. So what we have always done, and this is not a rule, it's just makes sense. Makes sense.
Common sense.
Common sense. You go back and you go to all 5 of, say you got 5 offers on the property. You go back to all 5 of those agents, buyer's agents, and say, we want your highest and best offer. One time. We're not one against the other, just give us your highest and best. And that's a process that really needs to go on to get the highest and best offer. One of our code of ethics are that we are to get the highest and best for our buyers or sellers. Of course, there's another realtor over there who's trying to negotiate the best contract he can for his buyer. Okay, but that's, once again, all of this is going on, and that's a step that has to be taken. Then once you've negotiated a contract, now you've got to get it to closing. But you've got to have marketed the property before you can get any offers, and you have to choose an offer before you can close a contract.
Okay. How does a homeowner determine the selling price for his home? And I think you've talked a little bit about this already.
Yeah, once again, one of the gauges that I would do if I were a seller, I would ask for 3 agents that maybe I saw their signs or maybe a friend recommended a certain agent. But I wouldn't stop at 1. I would ask for 3, and then I would see what they brought, and I would have all 3 of them do a market analysis for me. Okay.
Come up with a number.
It's one thing to walk through a house and measure it, and it's another thing to do a proper market analysis. And this is going to be the hardest thing for a new agent because they haven't seen many houses. Now, if you've been a full-time agent for a year, maybe you've been in 20 houses. Maybe not, because we don't do tours anymore. That was a great advantage I had years ago with Jim Judge taking me every Tuesday. There was a 2-hour tour of all the new listings. We don't do that anymore because homes are selling pretty quick. So anyhow,
Okay.
if you, where was I with that?
No, I understand
Oh, that's where I was going. So one of those three agents is going to impress you
okay.
with their experience, with their market analysis. And it's not necessarily the one that says, oh, we can sell your $400,000 house, and you know it's not worth $400,000.
I
You
see.
know, but that you've got to judge ethics and ability and the time that the agent has put in that really wants to sell your house for you.
Okay. Now, this is kind of comes off what I just asked about, is at the start of negotiations, there's different approaches that you could take. Should you start at the high end of the price
Now, we're
range?
talking about pricing the house, not negotiating it.
Right.
It's back to step one.
Okay.
You took me from step 3 to step 1.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
How do you price a house?
Well, you kind of went through that.
Okay.
Okay. Now you have a number. Okay. Now,
Okay.
or a range.
Yep.
Okay. Should you start at the high end of that range and then lower the price gradually depending upon what offers you get, or should you start at the price you want for the house and then wait for a buyer? Well, you're
Yeah,
in that.
Gotcha. That has changed 4 different times over the last 30 years.
Okay.
So let's talk about today, because that's the only thing that's relevant to us. Today, there are way too few homes on the market, and I can spend a long time talking about that and why it has happened. But we are now in a position. Well, let me give you a brief summary. When I first started, let's not go back that far. 20 years ago, there were 100 homes listed in Avon Lake at any given moment for years.
Right. Right. Right.
1920, I'm sorry, I'm not that old. 2000, let's say, or 1990 through about 2000, there were about 100 homes. And all of a sudden, it started to go down a little bit. And that brought us right into the housing market crisis of 2006. And then if I look back at my actual numbers, which I have here, excuse me for doing this, but in 2008, there were 220 homes on the market in Avon Lake.
Okay, all right.
And that I just had to pick up and by the way, that's a statistic you can't get from the MLS. These are records that I have kept
Okay.
my entire life. In just a few years later, there were 149. But remember, I said back in the early 90s and 80s, there were 100 all the time. Okay, well, we got to 220, and that's because of the housing market, and nothing was selling because we had too much glut in the market. Prices were coming down. In 2020, COVID, there were 50 homes on the market.
I see.
And that's just in Avon Lake. Today, this morning, I looked it up, there are 35.
Okay.
Now, it is because homes are selling quickly. The reason they're selling quickly and the prices have gone up is because there's so few homes on the market. And this is a national problem. It's not an Avon Lake or an Avon Bray Village problem.
Okay.
So today, you want a realtor who's going to, I don't know if I want to get into this at this point or not, but the Code of Ethics says that you're required to do the best you can for your seller in this case. I don't believe any realtor who's only keeping their house on the market 1 or 2 days is following the Code of Ethics. I think it is a breach of our Code of Ethics because you're to do no harm. That means to the buyer, the seller, or other realtors. And if you put a house on the market, and I don't care if you get 5 offers in 2 days or 30 offers in 2 days, there may be a buyer 3 days later who happened to be out of town for those first 2 days who's willing to spend $10,000 more for that house than any contract you happen to have in those first 2 days. Now, unless you've gone to the seller and said, there's a possibility, if we leave the house on the market for, say, 7 days, we'll get a better offer. Unless you've done that with your seller and he agrees, what seller would agree to that? What seller would agree to take their house off the market when there's the possibility of a better customer coming in 3 days?
Okay.
So I think it's a violation of our Code of Ethics to have a home only on the market for 1 or 2 days. I don't
Okay.
care how many offers you get, because as I've already said, what you have to do once you get those offers is you have to go over them with your buyer. The buyer or seller. The seller has the option of accepting one of those or as I said, you go back to each of the agents and you ask for your highest and best. You give them 24 hours typically to do that. Then you come back, okay, and then you sit down with the highest and best from those 5, 6, 10 offers you may have gotten in 1 or 2 days. And then after that, you're back into negotiation with one offer. The negotiations are over with. They've sent your highest and best, the seller's sitting there, I like this one better, boom. But there's that process, and if you get 10 offers in 2 days, that's a lot of work for the agent, isn't it? So why does the agent convince this, however could the agent convince the seller to take their house off the market after only being exposed to it for 2 days?
What's the minimum time, you would say?
Any listing I take, I don't put a day on it. If I were to list a home today on the 21st, I would put in the instructions to the agent in the multiple listing service that we will look at all contracts on the 27th, 6 days.
Okay. So essentially a week.
Yeah, essentially a week. Otherwise, I think you're cheating the realtor who happens to be sick that day, the buyer who's out of town that day or 2 days, and probably the seller because there's going to be another contract that could be higher.
It's pretty short time frames.
It's too short a time. And I think I hate to have rules, but this has got to happen because I think that somebody is going to decide to sue brokers because they're allowing their agents to not market the properties properly.
Understand. Now, we've talked about the multiple listing service, MLS. Can you give a very short description of what that is?
That's simply a listing of all the sales that are available to the public to purchase. And the multiple listing service itself requires probably 50 or 60 specific answers to specific questions. What's the address? What's the street? What area is it in? Those kind of things.
Is it 2 stories, 1 story? Yeah.
All of that. And then of course you have to have a price, and the price is in there. What is missing now, what used to be there before August of last year, is the commission to the buyer's broker. That's the story we've been sort of talking about here a little bit. You have to have a contract with your buyer's broker, and that buyer has decided that they will pay their realtor representative a certain commission. That's in the contract. So that's in the contract. And then the listing contract has the same thing, okay? But none of those commission numbers are now allowed to be in the multiple listing service. Just to find, I think it slowed the business up, except we get all these offers quickly.
Okay, so
it contains everything, and you can put up to 35 pictures of a house now.
Okay.
Which you probably should do for a lakefront property, but not necessarily for something that might be on Bell Avenue. I live on Bell Avenue, it's lovely, but I'm just comparing
a
1,000
residential
square foot
street
versus 3,000 on the lake, So,
Okay.
So all of that is in there, and that's what I present to my sellers. Comparables to their house is all of that detail that's in the multiple listing service with as many as 30 pictures. And then I can point out that if you notice, Mr. Seller, there are no ficus trees in any of these pictures.
Yeah, I understand. Now, this service, realtors need to pay for. It's not available to the public.
Correct.
I guess unless they're willing to pay.
No, you cannot unless you're a realtor.
You have to be a registered, licensed realtor.
Yes. And it's the broker that really opens it up for you. The broker is the one that's responsible for the people under him.
Okay. Under what circumstances should a client take a house off the market?
Well, if you're not getting any showings, you're probably 15% too high.
Okay.
If you're getting showings but no offers, you're probably 10 or 12% too high on your listing. Or condition. I'm willing to, I had a recent
if there's water damage
on James Circle, okay? And we told the fellow that, if you list it today, we can sell it for $338. If you put $30,000 in it, we'll probably sell it for $400. So that's another choice. You said, how do you get to a price? That's another choice we always present to our selling public. Here's what you are today if you do this. By the way, those people that I worked with for 5 years ended up completely tearing out the garage floor, putting a brand new garage floor in it. It's one of the reasons we got over asking price.
There you go.
But they did it.
And it takes a skilled realtor to know that would happen.
It takes, yes, it takes experience. It takes experience. Yes.
Okay. How important is a buyer's cash offer for the sale of a house?
The only time
You
that
see
you'd be
that from
concerned
time
about
to
a
time.
cash offer is that if you're afraid your house won't audit properly. You know, you've still got to have, there's really no difference because in the long run, 30 days later, the bank's going to give the seller cash, okay, if the house is appraised. So the only time you'd be afraid of the difference would be that I want a cash offer, so I don't want to have to go through the appraisal process. Okay.
Okay.
You can also do a cash offer maybe in 2 weeks, but what seller can move out in 2 weeks? I mean, cash offers tend to be 3 weeks long, and bank offers tend to be, contracts tend to be about 5 weeks because you do have to go through the process, certain processes. One of the things that I insist my buyers ask for is a home inspection. Okay,
Sure.
between offer and contract, you're going to have a home inspection. There's a lot of people involved during that process. Some people will accept the contract without today because things are moving so quickly. They will accept offer. I like that offer because I don't have to do a home inspection. I have to go through, as a seller. And not that
Okay.
they're hiding anything, but it does speed the process up.
Where should a buyer get a mortgage?
Wherever their realtor recommends. Or, if they have an association. I mean, I have done my business at the corner down here of Walker and 83 for 37 years, but I don't think I would go to them for a mortgage, even though I know and been doing it a long time. So if you have a personal relationship with a broker, I mean a banker or a mortgage broker, then we always have a recommendation. I don't know if I should plug them now or not, but
That's up to you.
we've used Bill DiCapua for probably 30 years.
Understand. Is it better to get a fixed or variable mortgage rate?
All depends on the buyer. From the standpoint, if you're planning on moving in 3 years, get a variable. They're probably less expensive. They're probably lower. If you're planning on making this your home, as we did when we moved here, we certainly got a fixed mortgage. If you're planning to be somewhere for more than 5 or 6 years, you probably are better off with a fixed mortgage.
Okay. And the duration of the mortgage?
Once again, the same thing. Most people will go for the 30-year because the payment is less, but of course it's twice as long, and you're paying more interest. But most people, when they buy a home, it's as high as they can buy in price, so they're probably going to go with the 30-year.
How about staging a home?
Very
You
important.
talked
You
about-
only have to do it. That ficus tree's got to go. It comes from experience, and a good homemaker can make those decisions too. I've had my husband wanted to fix this such and such for years. Now we're going to get it done because we're going to get it done to sell the house. I mean, common sense again, and experience.
Name of the show,
And
too.
experience, right?
Okay. Should renovations to bathrooms or kitchens be considered before listing a home for sale?
Of course, everything should be considered. Last year, there was every year there's a builder site that tells you what they think is the most important. And last year, it was front doors.
Oh,
Replace your front door. The second thing giving the best return was a garage door. Now, guess what that leads to? The outside appearance that's going to be the first picture that anybody sees in the multiple listing service, and also if they drive by. So those are the first two. After that, you consider kitchens and bathrooms. But once again, it's a matter of cost. And if someone's interested in getting top dollar for their house and maybe waiting for that buyer that's willing to, after they've spent the money to put in an all-new kitchen. This house I mentioned in Fairview Park, they had put in a brand new kitchen. It was built in, I don't know, 1960, 1972. So they had put a new kitchen in 93 anyhow. So it was done.
what are the primary factors considered by a house appraiser?
He's only looking at square footage. He wouldn't mind the ficus tree being there.
Okay.
Okay. He's only interested in, and of course, conditioned to a certain point, but certainly not the ficus tree. They're going to look and see if anything is broken or busted, or a new bathroom in a house would be probably taken a little higher in his judgment than something that's 50 years old. I mean, he just knows that the buyer is going to have to fix that, old bathroom.
Okay.
So, but mostly it's square footage, size of the house, and neighborhood. We met with the auditor 30 years ago, and I was surprised when he told me that there are, I think, 22 different districts that the auditor looks for just in Avon Lake. Well,
Wow.
well, obviously, what we affectionately call the 45s versus lakefront they're looked at differently from an auditor standpoint, and they're taxed accordingly differently. I don't know how that works, and I won't get into that. But the appraisal today, I've never had a house not appraised in 38 years. So we don't worry about that. Now, I may be an exception back when we had 200 homes on the market.
Okay.
And the
Too many.
appraisers were a little tighter, it was especially after that period of time, because the banks had, a lot of them gone out of business. They were struck with a lot of homes that they had to take back in 2008 and 9 that they didn't want to have. So then the appraising got a little tighter, but typically not to be. The appraiser asks me, they call up, I'm going to do an appraisal on such and such a house. Send me the contract. Send me a copy of the disclosures, the Ohio State form that the seller has to make off the disclosures. And he looks at that, and then, of course, he does his own thing with location and then walks through the house and measures all the rooms, typically.
Okay. Disclosures are water damage, fire damage to the house, or, what does that entail?
This requirement for a seller, is that they have to disclose any damage to the house in the last 5 years.
Okay.
The idea being that if you had a roof leak 10 years ago, you've probably fixed it.
Yeah.
Okay, and you don't have to disclose that you did it 10 years ago, even 6 years ago. But if you had a moisture show up in your bedroom in the last 5 years, you need to disclose that. And then you can say, and we had a professional roofer fix it in 2000 and whatever.
Okay.
They're very detailed and required. And the first paragraph says, do not lie. Okay, basically.
Should home warranty incentives by a seller be included with the sale of a home?
It depends. And once again, you're back to negotiations. And, I can ask as a buyer's agent for a home warranty, and the seller can take it out. And I either accept that or don't accept that.
What are the most common questions asked of an agent?
Probably how many homes have you sold? What's your experience?
Yeah.
What's the next step? That's probably the next biggest question throughout the whole process. The seller and the buyer, if you're working for a buyer, okay, what's the next step? Where do we have to go from here? I said, well, we got to have that. I got to have Mrs. Kodger make those 35 phone calls.
I see. And you've given us a lot of information during this exchange. Have you considered writing a book on buying and/or selling a house? I know you have lots of articles that you've written.
It's an interesting question. My oldest son suggested I do that about 10 years ago.
Okay.
I haven't taken the time to do it. I never went back and looked at all those articles. I started to do it so that I could present a proper picture to you. And I did write a weekly article, as I mentioned before, in the Avon Lake Press.
I read them.
Yeah, for over 600 of them.
Okay.
A lot of them were current that wouldn't be put in a book, but a lot of those, like I remember one of the things about sump pumps and other hazardous things. Okay, so I wrote about sump pumps, or if you think you've got a basement problem, you probably ought to correct it, and here's how to correct it, or here's how not to have it in the first place. Get the water running away from the foundation. So, because from an engineering standpoint, I could write those articles. Most agents couldn't. Okay. Once again, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a better realtor than the person who couldn't write the articles because they happen to have a philosophy degree instead of an engineering degree. Once again, it's experience. It gets back to looking at a house and going through a house and having a good idea of what it should be priced at.
A question I ask all my interviewees.
Okay.
In summary, what is making sense and what doesn't?
Well, I think I've mentioned making sense a few times through our interview here.
True.
The biggest thing I have today, for the first part, 37 years in the business has been wonderful. It dawned on me just a few days ago that 1,300 sales, that involved 2,600 families. I only represented one side or the other.
Yeah.
But I'm looking back and I'm thinking, I don't think I could have done a better thing for society in the last 38 years than help those 2,600 families.
You're helping
So
a
that's
lot of
good.
people.
You know,
yeah.
that's good about it. And there's been ups and downs throughout the business, but this idea of only putting a house on the market for 1 or 2 days makes no sense to me.
Okay.
Okay, and it shouldn't make sense to any seller. Okay, and I hope there's some sellers listening because that
Okay.
makes no sense.
I'm sure they are, or they should
Other
be.
than that, we're okay.
Okay. Well, how can you be contacted, Ken?
440-933-8326. That's a number that we've had as our business phone for at least 40 years.
Okay, and you have an email as well.
Yeah, it is westernclevelandhomes.com. So westernclevelandhomes.com, one word.
Okay.
Because we've sold homes mostly
you-
in Western Cleveland.
Do you have a direct email as well that'll appear? It's Kodger at kw.com. Is that a good?
That's an email. Yes.
Yes.
Kodger at kodger.com.
Okay, and that'll appear on the
I'm
bottom
sorry,
of the screen.
Kodger at kw.com.
Right.
Sorry.
And
Yeah.
that'll appear on the bottom of
Correct.
the screen. And thank you for appearing. I know your explanations of these of the real estate business it will help our viewers, and thank you for doing that.
I hope so. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, and thank you for watching. Please let us know if you have any questions or you have any comments to make. And let us know if you'd like to appear on the show or know interesting people who you can give us their contact information, and we'll take it from there. And remember, seatbelts save lives.